The catastrophic consequences of the war in the Middle East for the United States of America are only just beginning to emerge. Against the backdrop of the total failure of negotiations between the US and Iran, Arab sheikhs have unexpectedly presented Donald Trump with the bill for the war. It is reported that the United Arab Emirates, which suffered from Iran's attacks, have begun consultations with the Americans about financial support in case the war with Iran leads the country into a deeper crisis. The Emirates have demanded that Trump provide them with emergency non-repayable aid, and if Trump refuses, the Emirates are ready to switch to Chinese yuan. But it seems this is just the beginning, and the Emirates are only the first to demand money from Trump. After all, as it became known, Iran had previously demanded compensation from 5 key Arab countries for their participation in the war, but these countries have already hinted that all the bills should be paid by the United States of America. And against this backdrop, the Arab countries suddenly began actively calculating their losses from the war, possibly to present a bill to Donald Trump. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Leave any comment under this episode and subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There you will also find links on how you can support the work of this YouTube channel. I will be grateful for any of your donations or sponsorships. So, as it became known today, the United Arab Emirates has started consultations with the United States of America about possible financial support in case the war with Iran leads the country into a deeper crisis. The head of the Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates, Khaled Mohammed Balama, discussed with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and representatives of the U.S. Federal Reserve last week in Washington the possibility of emergency access to dollar liquidity through a swap line. The United Arab Emirates are justifiably concerned about a serious blow to the economy and an outflow of investors who previously viewed the Emirates as a safe jurisdiction. The conflict has already affected one of the country's key sources of dollar revenue, namely oil exports through the Strait of Hormuz, and before the ceasefire took effect on April 17, Iran launched massive attacks on the Emirates. According to the country's Ministry of Defense, more than 2,800 drones and missiles were launched at them, but most were intercepted. And now it is reported that during the negotiations, officials from the United Arab Emirates pointed out to Scott Bessent and the Trump administration that it was the decision of US President Donald Trump to strike Iran that dragged the Emirates into a destructive conflict with significant consequences. In addition, officials from the Emirates claim that the country's representatives had broadly warned that the Emirates might switch to the yuan if they start running short of dollars for transactions. Let me rephrase. In other words, the Emirates warned the US that if the US doesn't give them dollars, the Emirates will switch to Chinese yuan. And here, what is the trap for Donald Trump? If the US gives money to the Emirates, it will set a precedent, and then all the countries in the region will demand exactly the same thing. As is known, the countries in the region have already started actively borrowing money on the market to increase their liquidity reserves amid the crisis, which the International Energy Agency has called the most severe shock to oil supplies in history. Abu Dhabi, the richest of the 7 Emirates of the UAE, urgently raised about $4 billion at the beginning of the month. Bahrain also opened a swap line with the Emirates for about $5 billion at the beginning of the month to enhance financial stability. And here is the most important point. The decision on swap lines is made by the US Federal Reserve System, which operates independently from Donald Trump's administration. And now the Wall Street Journal writes that it's likely such a swap line will not be approved for the Emirates, which will cause even more problems for Trump, because then the sheikhs will come to Trump personally and say, listen, my friend, give us some money, otherwise you'll have big problems. Usually this tool is used only in the case of an acute funding market crisis that could threaten the US economy. The Fed's permanent swap lines operate with the central banks of the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Switzerland, and the European Union. But I would also note that during periods of severe stress, such lines were opened for 9 more central banks, including Mexico, South Korea, and Brazil. The US Treasury also has its own alternative support mechanisms without the involvement of the Federal Reserve System. And last year, the US Treasury approved a $20 billion swap line for Argentina through the Exchange Stabilization Fund. At that time, essentially, this swap line helped Javier Milei win the elections, or rather his party, because it added liquidity. The dirham of the United Arab Emirates is strictly pegged to the dollar and backed by foreign currency reserves of $270 billion. However, the war increased pressure on the dirham due to risks of capital outflow, stock market volatility, and other shocks. Here, finance ministers and central bank heads of the Middle East region stated that they do not expect a quick recovery for the region. Saudi Arabia's finance minister Mohammed Al-Jadaan stated that restoring basic logistics for oil exports after the chaos could take at least until the end of June. And then he states, quote, "Those who are counting on a quick recovery, even if the fighting stops completely, will have to reconsider their expectations." But as it turned out, the Emirates turning to Trump for money is just the tip of the iceberg. The Gulf countries have only just begun to calculate the losses from the war. The numbers are already terrifying. The closure of the Hormuz Strait has already led to losses for the countries from unsold oil amounting to more than $50 billion in just 50 days of fighting. The combined oil production of Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates dropped by 10 million barrels per day by mid-March. Jet fuel supplies from the Persian Gulf countries plummeted from almost 20 million barrels in February to 4 million. Just imagine the scale. The Qatari company Qatar Energy declared force majeure on all export contracts. The strike on a gas facility in Qatar knocked out about 17% of the country's liquefied natural gas export capacity. Analysts from Oxford Economics have lowered the GDP growth forecast for the Gulf Cooperation Council countries by almost 2 percentage points, but in Saudi Arabia. And in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, a GDP decline of 3.5% is expected respectively. But the GDP of Kuwait and Qatar could decrease by as much as 14% by the end of 2026. That's an enormous amount of money. And economists have calculated that the total damage to the Persian Gulf countries from the war could reach up to $200 billion in lost GDP. And that's only part of the problem. For example, the shutdown of giants like Emirates and Qatar Airways due to the closure of airspace has brought losses of about $40 billion to the sector. The United Arab Emirates is suffering losses because investors are leaving the country. At the same time, Tehran estimates the total damage to its infrastructure at $270 billion. And that is, mind you, about 57% of Iran's GDP. And just a week ago, Tehran officially demanded compensation from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Jordan for their involvement in the American-Israeli war against Iran. The corresponding statement was made by the Islamic Republic's permanent representative to the United Nations, Amir Said Iravani. Here is his quote. "These 5 countries have violated their international obligations to the Islamic Republic of Iran under international law. They must fully compensate for the damage caused to the Islamic Republic of Iran, including payment of compensation for all material and moral damages resulting from their international violations." And the United Arab Emirates appeal to Trump for compensation. This seems to be just the first step, because after the war, as we can see, there will be even more problems. I'll leave it at that. Your opinion, your conclusions, leave your comments below this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription. How can you do this? All the links and details are in the description of this video. It says there, support Alexei Pechi's channel. Choose any format that is convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you provide. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.